Today's webinar is about the importance of community marketing to your private practice, and I will talk some about the significant impact it's had on my practice. So you may have a part-time solo practice, full-time solo practice, or a group practice, but whatever practice you have, all the things that I discussed today will be relevant to your practice. And just before I get into my presentation, the slideshow, I do want to ask a quick question of everyone here, and you can type in your responses in the box. So has anyone here on the call today done any kind of community marketing? And you can just
type in the chat.
Type in the chat room, just yes or no, and then we'll come back to.
Okay, we're getting about half as many yeses and nos. Yes, it went poorly. Yes, I have to go throw up.
Okay, all right. So
more no's and a little. Yeah.
Okay.
Wait, question. What do you mean by community marketing? That might be a good place to start there.
Okay. So
and a little louder. People say it's a little soft.
Yeah, sure. So community marketing, I define it a little bit later in the presentation, but community marketing is really any sort of in-person networking that you're doing with other professionals. It could be primary care doctors, it could be psychiatrists, colleagues. It could also mean you're giving presentations, workshops, or seminars. So if anyone is doing any bit of that, just type that into the chat box. So I want to come back to the responses later, but let's go ahead and get started. I'll tell you a little bit about my background, and then we'll get into more of the community marketing part of the presentation here. So here's my story. So after graduate school and 4 years at a community mental health clinic in Orlando, Florida, I moved back to Washington, D.C. I'm originally from the D.C. area at the end of 2001. And I started a solo practice in D.C. about 4 months later. I slowly built up my practice while working full-time at an area hospital. But my practice remained part-time until about the middle of 2007, when I finally decided to take the plunge and quit my hospital job. So this is pretty much what I looked like when I decided to do this. I had lots and lots of fears and doubts. It was very scary for me to make the jump from part-time practice to full-time practice. I had all kinds of questions. What if I made a mistake? What if this fails? Tons and tons of self-doubt. And I also had a lot of holes in my schedule. I remember being home during the week in the afternoon, not in the office, and wondering, you know, am I ever going to fill up my schedule again? So, but even with all the fears and doubts that I had, I decided to stick with private practice because I knew that it was the kind of work that I wanted to do. I really enjoyed having freedom over my time. I liked the therapy, and I did not want to return to hospital work or clinic jobs. There were parts of it that I really didn't like, all the paperwork and all the boring meetings, and I knew that that was not for me. So I was going to stick it out. And back up here, sorry. So towards the end of 2007, I became a Blue Cross Blue Shield provider after about 9 months or so of filling out the paperwork and then finally approving me. And so for the first time, I began experimenting with community marketing at that time. So I started meeting with other therapists. I also started to meet with a few psychiatrists and primary care doctors. And fairly quickly, in about, I don't know, about 6 months or so, started to have some success. I moved from about 10 clients or so a week to about 20 clients. by early 2008, and a lot of that actually came from my community marketing efforts with one particular doctor, this one primary care physician who I decided to meet with. And I remember when I walked out after meeting with him, he said to me, I'm going to send you so many clients, you're not going to know what to do with all of them. And I remember thinking, you know, we'll see about that. But lo and behold, he was actually a huge part of that early success that I had. So by about the middle of 2008 or so, I had built a full-time solo practice, and I was seeing at minimum 25 clients a week up to 30 or even 32 clients a week around that time. And so I was able to then finally move into an office of my own. I no longer had to sublet from a colleague of mine. And I was working around her schedule, which meant that I was often working evenings and Saturdays, and I could start to work more normal hours. I still worked evenings, but I started to cut back on Saturdays. And it was around this time that I felt like I had finally succeeded and finally hit the big time. I felt like, you know, after all this work that I finally sort of made it. So I was feeling pretty good about myself. But then I think, as we all remember, the recession hit 2008, 2009, and my business took a hit, as I'm sure it did for lots of other therapists and lots of other people on this call, and started to have some anxiety about the sustainability of my practice. Was this going to be something that I could do long term? Because suddenly it took a real hit, and wasn't so sure about things. But again, I had to deal with some fears and self-doubt, and I turned those anxious thoughts into action. So what I did is I increased my internet advertising and significantly ramped up my community marketing efforts, meeting with more doctors, more psychiatrists, more colleagues, and within 3 to 4 months or so, my practice had picked back up to where it had been before. And then about a year later, maybe 2 years later, I started to become pretty frustrated with Blue Cross Blue Shield, probably something that a lot of people on this call can relate to. The reimbursements were low. Sometimes they would lose my paperwork. I'd have to resend all my paperwork. I'd get paid late. And so after a lot of back and forth and thinking about it, I decided to get off the panel sometime that year. And I remember telling a colleague of mine that felt like I was jumping off a cliff, but he was actually very helpful. He said that he had done something similar a year or two earlier, and that he was at the time out of network, and he said he really hadn't lost that many clients. And so that kind of helped me to dive in. I did lose some clients as a result, but not nearly as many as I thought that I would. But I did decide again to kind of return to what had worked in the past, which was community marketing, and I decided to do a lot more of it. And so it was around this time that I really expanded my list of primary care doctors, psychiatrists, and other professionals, and started meeting with them more. And I also put more time and energy into internet marketing and improving my website. And I think it was around that time that I really revamped it to the point where I thought that was a real benefit to me as well. So they did that for 2 years, and things were good. And then I started to have a pretty good problem to have, which meant that I had an overflow of clients. And so what I would do is I would refer them out to colleagues of mine, friends of mine, which was fine for a while. And then I started to think, well, what if I started to hire associates, hire other therapists to work for me and keep all those referrals in-house. So 2012, so a little over 5 years ago, I decided to create a group practice. And I started with one very part-time therapist. She was seeing 1 to 2 clients a week in the beginning. So again, very part-time. And this was an incredibly scary time for me. I remember bringing my rent check down to the property manager of the building where I work, and my hand was literally shaking the entire time as I was bringing it down to the property manager, because I was now spending twice as much. My rent had doubled since I had moved from one office to a much larger office that could accommodate 3 therapists, and it was 4 times the amount of what I had been spending years earlier when I was subletting from a colleague of mine. So it was an incredibly scary time. Lots of fears, lots of doubts. As I mentioned, very high overhead. So not only now was I responsible for keeping a full caseload for myself, but I had to provide clients to this other therapist who, you know, like most therapists would, she wanted more and more clients. It wasn't okay just to have 1 or 2 a week. And I remember, what the hell have I gotten myself into? I remember thinking that this was a sort of a potentially silly idea. And is this thing going to work? And how am I going to make it work? And so for many times throughout that year, and even into the following year, I thought about quitting. I thought about closing up the practice and returning to school of practice. But one of the biggest things that helped, so there are really 2 things that helped. The first is the knowledge that I'd already confronted lots of fears and doubts at different times in my career. Each time, come out successful. And the other thing is that I think I was smart enough to reach out for help, to get help, to get guidance from other colleagues, from other group practice owners, successful group practice owners. I've got a lot of knowledge, a lot of support from them, and I continue to do that. And I'm very clear that without that knowledge, that support that I got then and that I continue to get, that I wouldn't be in the position that I am. So that part was hugely important, and I'm very, very thankful and appreciative to that group of people.
David, someone asked if you could speak louder.
Yeah, sure.
And also, how did you deal with those anxieties? Was there specific techniques you used, or how did you? Because it sounds like that was something you had to deal with at every step of the way.
Sure, I'll try to speak up a little bit, and hopefully people can hear me a little bit. So, with regards to the anxieties and fears, you know, part of it was just putting myself out there and thinking that, you know, I don't have that much to lose. That I was going to try it, and if it didn't work out, then so be it. But I kind of had the mindset that, well, I'll try, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, I really haven't lost that much. I was pretty good at compartmentalizing that if one interaction didn't work out that well, then I was already on to the next one. So that mindset helped quite a bit. I never got too down on one negative interaction or an interaction that seemed like a failure. So just a couple of other quick points about this slide. So I also realized that I had to start thinking much more like a manager and less like a technician. So much more like a CEO of a company and less simply like a therapist. And there's a great book out there, and some of you may have read it, some haven't, called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, and it's undergone several editions over the years, but it's a really fantastic read, and I highly recommend it to any one of us. If you're in private, if you're in solo practice or group practice, either one, it's been hugely helpful to me. And then the other thing is that I had to overcome issues around being a boss, being a leader, what that meant to me, and the dynamic that that kind of grew out of that between me and the associates that I had. So I do want to stop here just briefly and kind of check in on the poll that we had earlier. Joe, do you have some results from that?
Yeah, about 2/3 of the people said no. They hadn't done community marketing. About 1/3 yes, with some limited results, and some with good results. So that's kind of the range.
Okay, so a little bit more than I would have thought. So the follow-up question to that, for those who have done some community marketing, could you share in the chat box what exactly have you done? So has it been meeting with psychiatrists? Has it been meeting with primary care doctors? Meeting with other therapists? Has it been offering free seminars, workshops, presentations? Anything like that?
Larry just said he does presentations. That's the first person responded to that.
Okay.
Letters to doctors, lawyers workshops, met with local doctors, monthly networking luncheon, networking with other professionals, talks in the community, talks to churches. Let's see, presentations, hosted dinner for treatment centers, letters and emails to therapists and doctors, talk to son's pediatrician, other therapists, workshops to school counselors, letter to other counselors. That's kind of a good range.
Okay, so it sounds like a lot of talks, presentations, and workshops rather than a lot of meeting directly with primary care doctors or psychiatrists. It also seems like a fair number of letters and emails.
Yeah, and some people said it's been hard to get meetings with doctors.
Okay. Well, there's some truth to that as well. So, all right, but I'm glad to hear that at least about 1/3 or so, Joe, is that right? About 1/3 of the people here have done at least some.
Yes, someone, Sharon just said, David, it's unrealistic to get meetings with doctors. They're too busy.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad that she mentioned that because I'm going to get into a little bit of that here later on. So let me just get you up to speed with me here. So my group practice as of 2017. Today we've got 6 therapists plus myself. We've got 1 full-time office administrator and 1 part-time office administrator. We've got 2 offices in Washington, D.C. And our gross income last year was $530,000, and this year we're on pace to do between $625,000 and $675,000. And I want to kind of highlight this part. The overarching story of my career thus far has really been about accepting new challenges and along the way overcoming lots of fears and doubts. And so I imagine that a good number of you have also experienced this, and so it's been a big part of my success. So,
David, a question: how much of that revenue is just from your sessions, or is it mostly from your group?
It is. So I represent a small and increasingly smaller number of that overall number.
Okay.
So just to kind of give you a quick number, so up until about a year ago, a little over a year ago, my figures represented about 25% of that overall number, and now it's down to between 10 and 15%.
Okay.
That's a good question. So there are two kinds of marketing in private practice. The first kind is internet marketing. So that can include things like SEO, search engine optimization, pay-per-click help, like Google AdWords, therapist sites like Psychology Today, Good Therapy, and lots of other therapist sites that have sprung up in the last 5 years or so. And I would say most therapists are doing at least some of this. And then you've got community marketing, which, as I mentioned earlier, I define as in-person networking with colleagues and other professionals like primary care doctors and psychiatrists. And it can also mean doing presentations, workshops, and I think very few therapists are doing this. You know, over the years, and I've been in this field now for 15 years, you know, just a very, very small number of the therapists that I've met, and I've met hundreds and hundreds of therapists, are doing any kind of community marketing. So, so one of the I think the questions to ask is, so why do community marketing? Particularly, why network with doctors? And that's the reason I bring up doctors, is because that's been a big part of my success. And I think, if you really boil it down, is that this is where the action is. And this slide and the next slide will show that. So this slide, the number of U.S. adults with a major depressive episode who received treatment in 2015 by type of professional. So the number one professional that depressed patients were going to see are their primary care doctor, by a ratio of almost 2 to 1 over even psychiatrists or psychotherapists. And the next slide also highlights the importance of networking with doctors. So here are the top 5 therapy areas in the U.S. 2015 by number of prescriptions. So the number one area in which doctors are writing prescriptions are for antihypertensive medication, high blood pressure medication. Things like Norvasc, lisinopril, things like that. And number 2, not too far behind, is mental health. So typically anxiety and depression. So again, it really sort of bears this out that it's important to not only do community marketing, but to do it with doctors, because they're on the front lines, they're seeing a lot of it, and again, this is sort of where the action is.
But David, Mary asked a good question. So this would only work if you're in network for insurance, right?
No, actually, it does not, and I got a slide that talks about that in just a few minutes or so. So it's a great question, but it does not only work for in-network whatsoever. So,
well, how many on your staff are in network?
So we are a completely out-of-network practice,
oh.
and we've been out-of-network since I started the group practice, and I've been out-of-network since 2010. So for 7 years, so for the first 2 years, 2010 to 2012, when I was just in solo practice, I was out-of-network, but for the entire time that I've had my group practice, we've been out-of-network. So it does not simply work for in-network providers, in-network therapists. 6 major advantages to community marketing. As I mentioned earlier, there is significantly less competition among therapists to do community marketing. As I mentioned, so many of us are doing internet marketing, and I think more and more of us are doing it, and it's beneficial for us, but very, very few of us are doing community marketing. So if you do it, you really differentiate yourself, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for a lot of therapists to get to the top of page 1 of Google. As I mentioned, so many of other therapists are doing it. increased competition. There's also the rise of e-therapy. Sites like BetterHelp.com and other sites are now jockeying for position at the top there. So it's becoming harder and harder to get to the top of page 1 of Google. And then number 3, relationships with primary care doctors, psychiatrists, and others, and other referral sources. They consistently generate, can last for many years with minimal effort and little money to keep them going. So this is sort of one basic difference between community marketing and internet marketing, where with internet marketing, you really do have to spend a fair amount of money. You've got to stay on top of it. And with community marketing, and I'll show you a few slides later, I don't spend much money at all, and the return on the investment has been very good. A couple more advantages to community marketing. Referrals from other professionals, in particular, primary care doctors, tend to be much stronger than those from the internet. You're getting sort of a stamp of approval from the doctor. You are sort of already being vetted. Patients tend to really put an awful lot of trust into their primary care doctors. So if the primary care doctor recommends or suggests that that patient calls me or somebody else in my practice, there's a really good chance that they not only will reach out to us, but make an appointment with us. And I've got a stat here. So the conversion rate that we have among people who find us from the internet, about 20%. So about 1 out of 5 who reach out to us from the internet wind up making an appointment, as compared to about 60% from community marketing. So 6 out of 10 times, if someone has been referred to us by their primary care doctor or another professional, they wind up making the appointment. A couple of other advantages. It also increases your brand in the community. You get to be that much more well-known. And it can be fun. I like this quote from Richard Branson down here, who's probably one of the greatest entrepreneurs of all time. He says, some 80% of your life is spent working. You want to have fun at home. Why shouldn't you have fun at work? So you can have some fun with this as well. And as I mentioned earlier, here's a little bit about return on investment. So since 2007, so for about 10 years, I've spent a little less than $18,000 in community marketing efforts, and this has generated $640,000 with a return on investment of 3,455%. And I know that the phrase $1,000,000 ideas get sort of thrown around a lot these days, but this for me is literally has been my $1,000,000 idea. So at this rate, with my community marketing efforts, starting in 2007, I'll hit $1 million in 2019, while having spent just about $20,000 to generate that. And this year, I'm on pace to generate just under $150,000 from community marketing efforts, and the cost to generate that is just about $750. And here is a chart that I wanted to show everybody. So the red represents amount earned from community marketing efforts. The blue is amount spent from 2013, 14, 15, and 16. In 2013, I spent $1,500 on community marketing to generate $48,000. 2014, I spent $2,000 and earned $81,000. And 2015, spent $1,700 to generate $87,000. And 2016, I spent $1,200 to generate $109,000. So again, it's relatively small investment of money, and the amount earned is pretty high. And not only that, but the amount that I've spent has gone down over time, and the amount earned has certainly gone up.
David, someone asked, what are those expenses? Can you give a general overview of what are you spending? It's not much, obviously.
Oh, sure. So the expenses would be things like lunches with other professionals, meeting them for coffee, things like that. It's almost always those two, meeting for coffees, meeting for lunches, things like that. So and I have done lots and lots of them, and so even if it's a small amount of money, it does sort of add up. But when you compare it to the amount that you generate, it's really kind of a drop in the bucket. So even besides all, the great return on the investment, there's more good news. You don't need a business degree or a marketing background to do community marketing. I don't have either. I did not study business as an undergrad or in graduate school. You do not need to be extroverted to do community marketing. I would say that I'm a fairly introverted person. And you don't need to be good at sales. I don't think that I'm particularly good at sales, but I think what I have been pretty good at is developing relationships over time and then maintaining those relationships. So with all this good news, how come therapists aren't doing more community marketing? Well, I think it's for three main reasons. I think there are a lot of fears about doing this kind of stuff. An example of that would be, well, what if I make a fool of myself? Some people have a fear of public speaking. What if it doesn't work out? So lots and lots of fears, and I certainly had some of my own early on. They've gone away over time, but that certainly plays a role. I think people have myths and assumptions, like the earlier slide, where I need to be good at sales or I need to be extroverted to do this. And again, I'm living proof that you don't need to be either. And then I think the third one is that I think some therapists don't even realize that this is an option, that they can do community marketing, and that it can be effective, and you can do it with integrity. And that it can be, in many ways, not only more lucrative than internet marketing, but really beneficial over time. So back to a question you had earlier. So don't doctors want you to be an in-network insurance provider? Well, again, I'm living proof that you don't have to be. I have not been in-network for many years now, and I don't plan on going back to being an in-network provider. In Washington, D.C., where we are, the overwhelming majority of therapists that I know are all out of network. I know maybe a handful, a little bit more than that, who are in-network. So there are a high percentage of out-of-network therapists and folks. Primary care doctors are aware of this, and they will still refer out to you. And I think a lot of times they have the belief that if you are out of network, then you're more experienced, you're more skilled, more seasoned, which is often the case.
So David, one question, how do you choose which medical professional to meet with?
So when I first started doing this 10 years ago or so, what I did is I just did a took about a 2-mile radius of primary care doctors that I found with just a quick Google search from my office, and I wound up cold calling them and asking if I could meet with them, and I dealt with an awful lot of rejection, which again I was okay with, but some of them accepted, and some of those today continue to refer clients to us.
Hmm.
So that's really how it all started. I did want to kind of circle back to the if there were any more responses from the chat box from that second question, Joe.
Which one?
If there were any more responses from that second question in the chat box, or
Oh, there's a couple of people have just asked some more specifics, like how do you set this up? How do you dress? Things like that are more common questions at this point.
oh, okay, I see. I wanted to see if any more people had responded to that second question.
No.
Okay, all right. So should you accept this challenge? Should you start to incorporate community marketing into your practice? You'll become less reliant on referrals from the internet, but greater income, more time off. You can start leveraging your time and expand to a group practice like I've done and begin to start creating passive income for yourself. And because I'm so passionate about how successful it's been for me, I've decided to teach a course to other therapists and to show you exactly how I do it. And I want to show other clinicians how they can master this and start to generate more income and increase their caseloads. So I'll be offering a 4-week crash course on community marketing, 30-day community marketing boot camp. So there'll be 4 topics, a different topic each week, and 1 week in between each call to read and review the modules and complete the exercises. I'll be posting tips, articles, personal experiences each and every week. These are the top 5 things that people will learn in the course, how to get past any fears and myths you may have about community marketing, who best to market to and why. Give you step-by-step instructions on my #1 community marketing tactic, and how a 1-minute, literally a 1-minute phone call can significantly improve your bottom line, and also why you don't want to ignore what I call related professionals to us, like acupuncturists and massage therapists. I think those professionals can sort of get overlooked, and they've also been a good referral source over the years. A couple of just quick testimonials from the class that I taught back in the fall. And I highlighted this quote toward the bottom here. It says, "Since I began the course, I've created new referral relationships and increased my caseload." And that's really the goal. I want people to learn as much as they can, increase their caseload, get more clients, make more money. And the reason why I put San Francisco and DC in here, the first testimonial was from a woman in San Francisco and a guy from DC, is that these are cities, these are areas that are saturated with therapists. And so if therapists like these are having success with the techniques and skills that I teach them, then I think anyone can benefit from them.
David, someone asked, would this work in a lower income area as well as more affluent area like the ones you just mentioned?
Yeah, I think the kinds of skills and techniques that I'll be teaching are applicable anywhere. I think in more rural areas, city areas, places that are more affluent, less affluent. I think all of that is really sort of secondary to the skills that I'll be teaching, because again, it's really all about developing relationships with other professionals, and then once they know you, like you, and trust you, they're going to start referring to you, no matter where you live, no matter what the socioeconomic status is. So here are the dates of the class. The class will start on Friday, April 21st at 1 p.m. and it will each class or each call will be 1 hour in length. First 40 to 45 minutes or so, I'll be teaching. I'll be reviewing a lot of what was in the module and adding to it, and then the last I don't know, about 15 minutes or so of each call I'll open up to questions from people. So it'll go Friday, April 21st, and then April 28th, May 5th, and then May 12th. And to sign up for the course, you just go to uncommonpractices.com/communitynetworking.html. The course is limited to 25 people. The cost of the class is $695. There is a 3-month payment plan that's available, $245 per month over a 3-month period. For an instant $50 bonus, just simply type the word READY, R-E-A-D-Y, into the coupon code field in the shopping cart when you register. You do need to sign up by this Friday, April 14th, to get that $50 bonus, and the discount is only available for people on today's live call. So just a quick recap for everyone. So people on this call would like to have more referrals to your practice without spending much money, and getting plenty of support, applying my step-by-step system that's helped generate over $500,000. Go ahead and sign up now for the community marketing program. And just one quick parting shot. So if after taking the class you only get 1 or 2 referrals for the rest of your career, I do believe it will have paid for itself. So,
okay, David, we have some more questions.
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, why does it take 4 weeks? Somebody want to know, why can't you just tell us how to do this like in a half hour on this call today?
Well, there's a fair amount of information to go over, and each one is pretty intensive, and so I decided, as opposed to the class that I taught last fall, which was 6 modules over about 12 or 14 weeks, to really condense it into 4, to teach everyone as much information, or to give as much information as possible in the shortest amount of time. In each module, as I said, it covers a different subject area, and a really important subject area of learning about community marketing. And I do go into a lot of depth, not only in the module itself, but also on each call.
Okay. Does this work with your own private, personal doctors and health practitioners, as well as ones that you don't currently have a relationship with?
Yeah, I imagine that it would. I haven't done any marketing with any of the doctors that I see personally, but I do imagine that it would work just as well. Sure.
Okay. And someone asked, what kind of counseling are you doing? Like, will this work for all different specializations, or do you have a particular niche that this works well for?
This would work for any kind of psychotherapy. So what we specialize in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. We primarily do individual therapy with young adults, 20s and 30s, and that's kind of our niche in DC. But if you did if you specialized in couples counseling, if you did EMDR, if you did somatic work, whatever kind of work you do, I think this would work very well. It's not just specific to the kind of work that we do. Again, it has less to do, I think, with the kind of therapy that we offer or that anyone on this call offers, but it has a lot more to do with creating relationships with other professionals, maintaining those relationships over time, and then as time goes on, again, you have to kind of feed those relationships a little less and less, because then these professionals have gotten to know you, like you, trust you, and patients go back to these doctors and they say, oh, I really have learned a lot, or I'm really feeling a lot better, and then those doctors are much more willing to then send you patients, because again, you have to figure that you're sort of solving a problem for them. A lot of times doctors don't know who to refer to, so if they find someone like yourself who they really like and trust and are hearing great things about, then they're just going to continue referring patients to you.
Okay. And David, did you develop, the biggest problem a lot of people are saying is like, how do we get our foot in the door? It seems like that's one of the biggest challenges once you get up the nerve to try this. And did you develop a system for that, or how did you figure that out?
I did, and that's part of what I'll be discussing in the second week of the class. I've got a detailed step-by-step approach to addressing that, because very early on I realized that can be a real obstacle. The secretaries, the office administrators are the gatekeepers, and so you really have to figure out a way, and you've really got to figure out a way to effectively work with them so that they do schedule appointments for you to see the doctor, because you're never gonna call up an office and speak directly to the doctor. You always have to go through these gatekeepers, and you've got to figure out a way to have good relationships with them. They are just as important as the doctors themselves.
Okay. And another question, is it important to follow up after you have one of these meetings?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's something else that I'll talk about in week 2 in depth. That you can't just look at it as sort of a one-shot deal that you meet with someone one time and hopefully you've kind of created a relationship with them. It's sort of like any other relationship. If you met with that person once, there's not much depth to it. You wouldn't automatically think you have much of a bond or relationship with that person. It's really meeting with them many times, talking to them many times, developing that relationship. So you really have to sort of feed it over time.
David, someone asked, is there any specialties or medical practitioners you found it's better not to try to do this with, or can it work with pretty much any specialty?
I've tried it with lots and lots of doctors. The few that I would say where I've not had much success have been, and I was a little bit surprised by it, but dermatologists and plastic surgeons. I found, and I didn't do a lot of community marketing with them. I did a little bit, but I found that those two I had literally zero success, and so after a while I sort of cut my losses with those two.
Got it. Okay. All right, David, it looks like we're at the top of the hour, and I know people have sessions to go to. So I want to thank you today for this presentation on community marketing. And we'll send out an email to everyone who registered. Are you willing to share the slides? Is that okay?
Oh, yeah.
PDF of your slides?
Yep, absolutely.
And then a copy of the video and stuff. And then, and so you mentioned this course starts on the 21st. You can get the bonus $50 off by Friday with the coupon code READY, which I put in the chat box. And it does sound like you've spent years developing this, so it's a pretty complicated process, I'm sure, from beginning to end, with the follow-up. And as someone like myself who does a lot of internet marketing but spends money every month, I can see the tremendous value. The return on investment is unbelievable. I've never heard anything like that. So thank you again. And if we have any further questions, you can send us an email at info@uncommonpractices.com, and we can forward those to David. And thank you all again for your attendance, and we'll look forward to seeing you on our next webinar.
Thanks very much.
All right, bye now.